we're going to make an 1870s wrapper. Hi everyone, I'm Caitlin. I teach old-fashioned sewing skills on my channel. And yeah, today we're going to make an 1870s wrapper. Pretty self-explanatory, right? I have been dealing with my was supposed to be an 1850s wrapper that ended up just being too flat in the front, so I called it an 1870s wrapper for longer than I care to admit, right? I know better. So we're going to actually make myself a proper 1870s wrapper today. And if you're new here, welcome. Hi again, Caitlin. I am a professional seamstress. I used to work in museums, I no longer do. I do keep a small collection of original garments, and I have friends who collect originals, and I copy them. And that's what we're going to do today, is copy an original 1870s wrapper. I know my videos can be somewhat chaotic, so I appreciate y'all returning each and every time to watch the chaos. I have been eyeing Marna Davis's, I think it's the Flora 1870s wrapper, for a while, thinking, ooh, I like that. And I was just about to buy it, and then I remembered that 2 months ago, Marna sent me a grid of one of her other originals that has not been made up into a pattern yet. And it just so happens that the lady is very close to my size, about an inch smaller in the bust, so I'm going to have to add an inch right around here. But it has scallops on the hem, and I love scallops, so I was like, you know what, we're copying that instead. So that's what we're going to do today. I originally had this fabric set aside for an 1870s wrapper. The more I look at it, the more I fall in love with it. And I decided that I don't do 1870s enough to waste this fabric on an 1870s wrapper. It's almost never going to be seen, and this is too pretty to allow that to happen. So this is going to be saved, and we're going to make an 1860s dress with it at some point in time, or maybe 1850s. I haven't quite decided yet. One of the two. And then I found 6 jars of this, which is more 1860s in style, but for wrappers that works. It's a dark blue with all these little squiggly lines in it, and then these orange and red dots, or ovals, really, egg-shaped things. And I'm pretty sure I can do this project in 6 yards, so we're gonna find out. I did just print off the grid pattern. I just measured it, and the grid is off. It's 3/4 of an inch instead of an inch, which means that this is only 3/4 size, which isn't going to work. So I'm going to reprint all this out and then tape all the pieces together, and it looks like a fairly easy pattern. It's a very simple style. You see it in the late 1860s to the early 1870s all over the place. I can find it nearly the exact wrapper, you know, different fabrics, different trimmings throughout this time period, and I can find like 5 or 6 of them just in the 10 minutes that I looked. When I just literally Googled 1870s wrapper, and I found at least 5 or 6 that are basically the exact same wrapper. So it's a very popular pattern, and we're going to try it out today. So it's just a front piece or 2 front pieces, there's a side piece, and then there's a back. Super simple. The original that Marna has trim, so it has like extra bits here and then around the hem. I don't think we're going to do that because I don't think you're really going to be able to tell on this fabric. And wrappers, especially cotton wrappers, are not likely to have a contrasting fabric put on top of them. Wrappers more often than, say, a dress would, but this particular style wrapper, I could only find them trimmed in self fabric. So I decided not to use any other fabric. We're just going to do this, and we're going to make a very plain style wrapper. I might put a ruffle on it depending on how much I have left. I don't know how that's going to work, but we are going to do the scallops at the hem that Marna's original has, and I think that's going to be enough decoration. Alright, here we are at the cutting table. I think this is going to work. I did measure in height, and I had to add a few inches just because she's taller than me. Or sorry, she was shorter than me by like 3 inches. And so I'm going to need a lot of bias. Not just for like the sleeves and the neckline, but this whole hem has to be bound. This will probably end up being biased right here, this little extra bit. I think I'm going to look at my trims and see what velvet ribbons I have. I don't know if it'll really show up on the dark fabric, but I feel like I want a velvet ribbon trim on the sleeves and bind the skirt in it as well. I'm gonna run that on one extant wrapper, and I kind of like the look of it. And there's the back. And fold that in half. These will be my cuffs. And if I bind the whole thing, I won't need nearly as much piping as I thought. I only need some for the neckline and then the arm size. And I think this should be plenty right here for those two things. There's piping. I'll set that to the side for scrap. All right. I guess I'll pull out trim, see what I got. We'll just go start sewing things together. I think we'll go ahead and start with the sleeve, mostly because it's right here. You know I'm about to sew on that machine, right? Like I'm literally about to come sit down and sew. Could you be any more in the way? I don't think you particularly care. Alright, this should be a very quick, simple thing to sew together in theory. So let's see, this is the back. And the whole thing, even on the original, was unlined, so we're not going to align ours either. What I am going to have to do, though, is run a gathering thread here by hand, because all of this needs to be scrunched down to fit into this space here. Alright, so this is the side and the back. I went ahead and just put a quick gathering thread on this, but we're going to go right ahead and just put it together. And these sides and side backs don't always match perfectly. You just kind of have to ease it in. It's very normal. So this will get put to this. There we go. And I'm just going to tie this off just so it doesn't undo itself and the gathers stay nice and taut while I sew this. And the skirt's a little bit, one side's a little bit bigger than the other, but not by much, so I'm just going to pin it in a couple places to help distribute the little extra fullness. It's maybe half an inch. And this is Wilma, for those of you who are new. She's early to mid 1870s, an original machine. It is Wilcox and Gibbs. And yeah, she's on a treadle, so it's real easy to make her work. She goes super fast. It makes me so happy. I have her on her largest stitch right now, which is 12 stitches per inch. She goes down, I think it's to 32, is it 32? 30, it goes down to 30 stitches per inch, which is itty bitty, and I have done it at that, but typically you only do that for like silk and that sort of thing, so. And you just kind of push her just a little bit, and I go with my feet. There she goes. So it's going to be very hard to see on camera, especially because my lighting is not great in this corner. But she does a straight stitch, or what looks like a normal machine stitch on the front, and then a chain stitch in the back. You see it's a little bit thicker. And that is because she does not have a bobbin thread. So there's no bobbin underneath there. It is literally just a little space for the needle and like some whirly gigs. And that's it. So she only has a top thread, so the single thread goes through, it makes a loop, the second, goes through again and it catches the loop. So it makes a chain stitch, which is fantastic because I don't ever have to worry about a bobbin running out, right? The problem is that you pull the wrong thread on a chain stitch and it just comes right out the whole seam. So you do have to tie off the ends, which I'll show you in a minute. Tie the thread off. There we go. Get her to make a loop so I can pull it out now. Come on, there it goes. there's my little loop. I gotta put this thread, the loose thread, through the loop. I'm gonna use a hand needle to kind of tie it back in. Just a few stitches. Doesn't take much. Right, and there is the back and side sewn together. I'm going to sew the shoulder seam on this one. And for those of you who are new, I am fully aware you're not supposed to sew over pins. I've been sewing for well over 20 years at this point. I know that it's a no-no. I still do it. Alright, sew the front seam now. So this is the side piece to the front. Oh. I lost my thread. Oops. It's too big to fit in here. Otherwise I'd have it in there where it belongs. So it has to sit there. All right. So there's the entire wrapper sewn together essentially. So the only things I have to do now are, I'm gonna go ahead and make piping. I think that's gonna be our next step. And then sew the sleeves, put the sleeves in, and really just be finishing details such as hem. The nice thing about wrappers is they're typically very simple and short projects. They're not meant to take a long time and to be super fancy. Alright, switching over to a little bit of handwork. I'm putting piping into the arm size, which would be a very common practice in the early and mid 19th century. Kind of disappears though by the 1880s. Looking at the original garment that I'm copying, I do see that the bodice is piped at the arm size, which is the armhole. So I'm here. I prefer to put my piping in by hand. I just feel like it's less bulky than when done by machine. And this does not have to be sewn in very well. It's really just getting basted in. And as a reminder, because I have not specified this in a while in several of my videos, but piping when it is done is extremely tiny. We're talking size 8 or size 10 crochet cotton, nothing yarn size and nothing the size of the cotton piping that you can buy in the stores. And it is also at least 99% of the time done in self fabric, not a contrasting fabric. So notice I'm using the same fabric and I cut a little bit of piping and I'm putting it in. It's just a little detail that a lot of people miss when they're making reproduction clothing, but it is a big detail that was on the vast majority of dresses. It starts off being in almost every seam in the bodice in the early 19th century, and then slowly and surely you see it less and less and less. And the very last, I guess, huzzah for piping is really in the arm size, where it is touted as strengthening the seam a little bit more. Now the bodice is ready for sleeves. We gotta make the sleeves. So this is sleeve. It is one piece, and it is the most interesting sleeve shape I've ever seen. I've never seen one like this. This is very interesting. Anyway, we're going to sew this little dart thing in here, and it's gonna make a coat sleeve shape but out of one piece, which is very interesting. So it gets sewn here at the dart, and then it gets sewn all the way up here as well. not dying. You've been fed twice today. So what I'm doing now is sewing on the cuff, which is a separate piece in mine. It looks like it's a separate piece in Marna's, but I didn't see a pattern piece for the cuff. So what I did instead is just make a rectangle, and that's going to be my cuff all around. Now I'm going to trim it with velvet ribbon. So I'm going to put velvet ribbon here and velvet ribbon here. I'm not going to sew this at all. Like, this is going to be loose. I'm going to sew the trim on, and when I sew the trim on, I will also sew the cuff down. So it's doing one seam, but it's sewing down multiple things. It's just an easy way to streamline things. And again, I learned that from another 1870s original. So since I haven't had my hands on this particular one that we're copying, I'm using other ones as my, I know this was done. Alright, sewing on the trim on the cuffs can be kind of difficult because it's such a tiny little sleeve here. But it's doable, it's just difficult. Oops, as I let it fall out. And the top portion of this, and then I will do the other one off camera. And that is the hardest one to do, so you probably won't be able to see too much from that anyway. After this, I am going to put a little bit of a gathering thread by hand, of course, into the top of the sleeve, because apparently this one's very lightly gathered on the very tip top of the sleeve. And it's really nice because because I basted that piping in, I have a very thin line, basting line, that I can stitch by. Which is the reason I like to baste my piping in as opposed to just keeping it pinned in and then pinning the sleeve over top. This gives me a very nice line where I can still see the piping from the front, but I'm not showing excess piping, I'm getting it right on that line. Alright, I am working on the hem. I did put it on. So, as I said earlier, I'm a little bit taller than she is. Apparently, I'm taller in the waist, but our legs are the same length. So technically, I should have added those 2 inches to the bodice part, not to the skirt part. So it is a little bit short-waisted on me, but it's not bad and it is a wrapper, so I'm going to leave it. It's going to be fine. But yeah, other than that, it fits great. So everything that we did worked out fantastic, and all I am doing right now is binding this hem with 1-inch velvet ribbon, and this is not very much fun. Originally, the original one had it bound in bias, which would be a lot easier because bias would take the curves better. I have seen bound velvet hems, particularly in the late 1860s. It is a known historic practice that I have seen on originals. Alright, I am binding the neckline. I realized that the binding of the hem was probably only a minute your time. It was like an hour and a half to 2 hours my time, so I'm getting ready for this project to be done. I don't like doing the same step for very long. I have the perseverance to do it. It just strains me. Alright. I'm going to fold that under, and I'll see you back here for the hand stitching of that part. I'm just going to do the prep work. I almost got all the way through this and realized I hadn't filmed it. So here we are, putting on the binding with the hem stitch, which we now would call a whip stitch, but in the period it's called a hem stitch. Alright, so that is now finished. I have to go find some buttons. Alright, the next step, we're going to make some buttons. And so I thought about for a long time what kind of buttons I wanted. The original had mother of pearl that were brown buttons. I thought about maybe some of my vegetable ivory buttons, maybe some of my mother of pearl buttons. None of them were big enough. I have a lot of 3/8 inch buttons, and the original had 5/8 inch buttons. So that wasn't going to work on a just scale level. They would have looked really tiny. And so thought about, okay, what buttons do I have? And I looked into buying some, and then I was like, you know what? No, because I have lots of velvet fabric, and this whole thing is trimmed in velvet, so let's make some velvet covered buttons. And then her buttons were more domed, but I have these wooden things. So I'm putting, there's a domed, slightly domed side, and there's the flat side. So I'm putting the domed side up so it'll be a little bit more domed. And then the original had 9 buttons, so we're gonna copy that. I just, on the bottom of the wrapper, and then on top of the wrapper, and then I just measured out 7 more in equal proportions. And so they are quite far apart. I mean, you can see this is how far apart they are, but I suppose it'll be fine. And I thought about a belt, and I decided that I kind of wanted a corded belt, but I don't want to wait to get the cord in as far as debuting this video goes. And I was looking at corded belts, and a lot of them were trimmed with the cord as well. It wasn't just like a corded belt, it was trimmed in the cord, and then it had a cord belt. So I was like, okay, well, I don't have it trimmed in cord, so that isn't right now the best choice as far as I can tell. So I don't want to make a self-fabric belt. That's just a lot of work, and all my wrappers have self-fabric belts, and that's just no fun. So what I've decided is I already have velvet belts made of black velvet ribbon, and we'll use that as my belt. Very last step, putting in buttonholes. I am almost to the end. I have one more after this one. They are quite large buttonholes because these are quite large buttons. But since I'm using a belt that I already have, I don't have to make that, which makes my life a little bit easier. Tie the belt on, so I'll just go ahead and get all my underpinnings on, just, you know, chemise. I'll see if I can find my bustle. I think it's at the bottom of a closet right now, and I don't feel like digging for it, so if nothing else, I'll have a chemise, corset, and petticoat on, but I will try to find the bustle, since this is really a bustle-y shaped garment. Alright, have all the underpinnings on. So, well, didn't find the bustle, but I got enough back there, I think we'll be fine. And the wrapper. I already buttoned the buttons on the bottom, so it won't take too long to button on the top here. Is that it? That's it. Alright. Hold it back a little bit. But you can kind of see, like, there's my actual waist. And it's quite short-waisted. She was very short-waisted. Her legs are about as long as mine. She was just very short-waisted. Because about what I added in the skirt, I should have added in the bodice. It just didn't cross my mind. And there it is as a wrapper, like a very nice wrapper. It actually looks really good. It's all caught up in the back. I don't know that even got on camera, but there we are. It's a nice walking length. I really like this. This is very nice. I wasn't sure about the really dark color because the original was so light and pretty. But it looks very respectable, I think. Like, it's very nice. And of course without the belt, so this could be like a over the nightgown. I need to go to the outhouse wrapper. Also make a very nice maternity dress when that time comes. There's plenty of room in there. It's not at all fitted in the bust either. So like if I grow here, it's not a big deal. I love Marna's floral pattern. I'm very thankful she gave this one to me, and I love this pattern. It's not something I would have picked out. Like if you show me Flora and you show me this one and she had them both up for sale, I would have gravitated towards Flora. But this is just a great example of how sometimes things turn out way better than expected. It's not a color I typically I love blue. This is a much darker blue than I tend to gravitate towards. I tend to either go for sapphire blue, which would be the darkest I would ever go for, to more of a sky blue, and kind of in the range in between there. I don't go super light and I don't go super dark. And this was darker than I would have chosen for myself. But after looking at the one I had set aside for an 1870s wrapper and realizing how much I love it, I am glad that I saved that, or am saving that, for a 60s gown, because I think that would be in much more, I think that would be a much more useful garment, and I will probably need another 60s gown before too long. And that way you can kind of see the shaping of it all. Again, it's nice and full. It's not super thin, but this is the 1870s, so it's not supposed to be super thin. That is one more project off the 1870s list. I think most of the rest of this year in terms of 19th century projects is going to be my 1870s wardrobe, because I do need to pull that together. We're starting to do way more 70s events, and I need to get my life together in terms of 70s clothing. So, but I think for our 1870s wrapper, I'm glad I finally have one. That's very nice. And again, it can be worn 2 different ways. And I really had no trim plans or anything when I went into this. I was just going to make a simple wrapper, but I think doing the velvet trim and doing the scallops in the velvet was a really good choice. So overall, it turned out, again, not like my plans, but my plans were very minimal, and this ended up far exceeding them, which is always a great thing when your plans are exceeded. But I find that if you have very low expectations for your projects, you will meet them and usually exceed them, and it makes you feel very accomplished and good about yourself and your dressmaking skills. So that's just a strategy I picked up over the years. It's have a low set of expectations and plans, and when you're in the moment, let the fabric speak to you, and usually the fabric is right. So if you've enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to the channel. Click the little bell notification so you're notified anytime I upload a new video. And as always, have a fantastic week, and I'll see you back here in the next video.